Hi, my name is David. I'm in Tainan, and this is Taiwan in English. In today's exciting episode, we will be taking a first look at the poem, Casey at the Bat. There are a couple of things to remember before we start reading it. First, this poem is old. It was written well over 100 years ago in 1888. And between then and now, English has changed a little bit. Okay, more than a little bit. It's important to keep this in mind because some of the phrases will sound old-fashioned because they're old-fashioned. The next thing is that it has something that is uncommon in poems, but very common in storytelling. It has multiple voices. Any type of narrative or story is generally going to have a narrator, the person telling the story. This poem also has Casey, a voiced umpire, and a voiced crowd. There are a couple of ways to handle characters. The easiest is just to have the narrator say their lines. It's easier, but if there are too many lines, it can be confusing. Change your voice, change your cadence or speed, or change your accent. This can be a lot harder and always runs into the possibility of sounding fake. The only way to get over the fake or unnatural sound is to practice. Recording yourself and listening back to it or having other people listen can be really helpful. But the most important thing is to practice. That means to practice in the way that you will be performing, not lying in your bed, mumbling your lines. We'll talk about that more in another exciting episode. So what should you do here? I'm not going to tell you what you should do, but I will talk about what you could do. In this poem, all of the lines said by characters are in quotes and either directly before or after the author has told us who said it or thought it. That, along with the fact that there just aren't that many lines, makes it really clear who is talking. You know your strengths, I hope, better than I do. And going with your strengths is a very reasonable approach. That being said, try to stretch yourself at least a little bit. There are two lines that you have to be careful of. The first is the line between fake or robotic sounding and believable or natural. The other is between the believable and the ridiculous or too much. Unless you are trying to be funny or make some kind of a joke, believable is the goal. And normally, you want to be as close to the too much line as you can get without going over. Okay, this is getting to be too much information. How about we read the poem, and in a future exciting episode, we can talk about its form and rhyme scheme and how it might be said to change its feel or feeling. So, Casey at the bat. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville Nine that day. The score stood 4-2 with but one inning more to play. And when Cooney died at first and Barrows did the same, a pall-like silence fell upon the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to go in deep despair. The rest clung to the hope which springs eternal in the human breast. They thought, if only Casey could get a whack at that, we'd put up even money now with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, as did also Jimmy Blake, and the former was a hoodoo, while the latter was a cake. So upon the stricken multitudes grim melancholy sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey getting at the bat. But Flynn let drive a single to the wonderment of all, and Blake, the much despised, tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had lifted and man saw what had occurred, there sat Jimmy safe at second, and Flynn a hugging third. Then from 5,000 throats and more there rose a lusty yell. It rumbled through the valley and it rattled in the dell. It pounded on the mountain and recoiled upon the flat, for Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing and a smile at Casey's face. And when responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his hat, no stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded as he wiped them on his shirt. Then while the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance flashed in Casey's eyes. A sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere came hurling through the air, and Casey stood a-watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman, the ball unheeded sped. That ain't my style, said Casey. Strike one, the umpire said. From the benches, black with people, there went up a muffled roar, like the beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore. Kill him! Kill the umpire! Shouted someone in the stand, and it's likely they'd have killed him had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult and bade the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the dun sphere flew. But Casey still ignored it, and the umpire said, Strike two! Fraud! Cried the maddened thousands, and echoed or answered, Fraud! But one scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain. They knew that Casey wouldn't let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lip. His teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go. And now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land, the sun is shining bright. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light. And somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. That is the end of Casey at the Bat, and we will see you in a future exciting episode to talk more about poetry. Bye.